Hey, I'm Josh with Our Revolution, Colorado Springs, and here today we are with Andrew Romanoff, who's running for Colorado Federal Senate. So thank you, Andrew, for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So this is going to be a real quick thing because I know we're in a hurry, but just a real quick. So what would you say? Well, let's start with what got you involved
in the Senate race.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I joined this race because I didn't want anybody in the richest nation on the face of the earth to struggle or suffer or die on account of problems we can fix. I served with Cory Gardner in the State House for 4 years. I led the Democrats in Colorado to our first majority in 30 years. I became Speaker of the House and got recognized as one of the most effective legislative leaders in America. But I disagree with Senator Gardner on just about everything, on climate action, on health care, on immigration reform, on gun violence prevention, on campaign finance. I think he's wrong. And these are real issues in the Democratic primary too. I've staked my campaign on my support for a Green New Deal and Medicare for all, proposals that John Hickenlooper compares to the work of Karl Marx and Joseph Stalin. I expected we'd be fighting Cory Gardner. I didn't realize we'd be up against a Democrat who was parroting his talking points.
Oh, right?
Yeah, it's outrageous to me.
Yeah, well, so I guess your stance on fracking then?
Yeah, I've called for a ban on fracking. Look, I think we need to move as swiftly as possible off of fossil fuels and into a clean energy economy. I know Hick has taken a different view. He sued communities that tried to restrict fracking. He literally drank the fracking fluid. He takes money from the fossil fuel industry. I think his judgment is clouded by the money, not just the fluid. And it seems to me if we're serious about creating a world where our children are no longer condemned to live under storms and heat waves and droughts and wildfires and floods that become even more frequent and more destructive, and where hundreds of millions of people are forced to flee, then we need to stand up to the fossil fuel industry, end the $650 billion a year that we're spending in direct and indirect subsidies on oil and gas and coal, and put that money instead into solar and wind and geothermal and other renewable energy sources, transform our electrical grid, our transportation system, our building codes. We need to do this now. I suppose if we were having this conversation, say 40 years ago, when Jimmy Carter was installing solar panels on the roof of the White House before Ronald Reagan tore them off, then maybe we could afford to indulge the kind of incremental approach that some candidates are proposing. But it's too late for that.
So did you say that you do want us to get to 100% clean energy then?
Absolutely, yeah. We've laid out a pretty aggressive timetable on our website at andrewromanoff.com because the climate crisis, to my mind, represents the fundamental moral test of our time. We either get this right in some ways or nothing else much matters.
And do you have a timeline that you'd like to see it by?
Yeah, I think we need to get there under our plan at least by 2040. But in the meantime, we need to put the whole country on a national mobilization. One of the reasons that I won the endorsement of the Sunrise Movement, in addition to Climate Hawks, the Climate Army, we got a blessing from 350 Colorado Action, is because we have such an aggressive approach. I'd like to get there sooner if we can.
Well, just for the sake of time, let's just jump into your top three.
Sure. So we talked a little bit about climate action. On healthcare, I ran a mental health organization for the last 4 years with the president of a group called Mental Health Colorado. We were talking a little bit here in the Springs about the need to end the stranglehold that the insurance industry and the drug companies have over our healthcare. I think we ought to get to a place where your ability to enjoy high quality healthcare, including mental health and substance use services, does not depend on the whims of an insurance company or the generosity of an employer. You ought to be able to get that coverage whether you change jobs or lose your job or don't have a job at all. We're not there yet, in part because we never put a universal single payer plan on the table 10 years ago when I was calling for it then. And instead we couldn't even get a public option as part of the bargain. This is a profoundly personal issue to me because I've met so many families across the state and my own family as well who have suffered from mental illness or drug addiction. El Paso County has, as you know, one of the highest teen suicide rates in the state. Colorado has one of the highest suicide rates in the country. And I will not stand by while more families lose their loved ones, not just because of diseases that we can treat, but also because of the indifference of an industry that bases its profits on its ability to deny as many claims and exclude as many sick people as possible. That's the business model. And it's a great model, I suppose, if you're an insurance company. It's a pretty lousy model for the rest of us.
So I was going to ask, Medicare for all means different things to different people.
Right.
And so how would you define it, and do you support it?
I do support Medicare for all, and I'll tell you what I mean. First, we ought to strengthen Medicare by adding some benefits that aren't part of the package now, like dental and vision and hearing and long-term care. Second, we ought to lower the age of Medicare eligibility to 0, which was part of the original game plan. If you go back to 1965, when LBJ signed Medicare and Medicaid into law, you'd find then that he didn't intend to just end with seniors. The proponents said, why don't we include everybody? The point of insurance is to spread the risk. And that's why I support this plan. I think we ought to take a lesson from the rest of the industrialized world, which is spending half as much and getting healthcare outcomes that are often better. We're leading the world in spending, but our life expectancies aren't longer, our infant and maternal mortality rates aren't lower. We're just going broke. 500,000 families, in fact, go bankrupt because they can't afford their medical bills. 35,000 Americans die because they can't afford to see a doctor. 28 million Americans are uninsured. 44 million are underinsured. No other politician, to my knowledge, outside of the United States is campaigning on a promise to bring their constituents American-style health insurance.
Yeah.
It's just not a winning argument.
And then, so we've got climate, healthcare. What would be your third?
So I want to build an economy that works for everyone. And that means folks who are struggling to get to this country, including comprehensive immigration reform. It means raising the minimum wage. It means making higher education available to all Americans. It means holding down the cost of housing and childcare. We put together a package at andrewromanoff.com that lays out those priorities. I will tell you, if we're serious about building an economy that works for everyone, we need to build a government that works for everyone. We don't have a government like that right now. We've got a government instead that showers tax breaks on folks at the top, but really shortchanges folks in the middle and at the bottom.
So sounds like you mentioned taxes, so you'd be interested in some kind of tax reform then?
I would. I'd like to reverse the Trump tax giveaways to gazillionaires and giant corporations and instead make it possible for all Americans to enjoy the services they need and force the folks at the top to pay their fair share. They're wiggling out of those payments now, in part because they're instead subsidizing members of Congress. Most folks would call it bribery, and getting the benefit of that corruption. I don't know of a fancier term.
Yeah.
Andrew, thank you for joining us and giving us some time today.
Thank you very much.
You got to get going. I have just one quick question for you.
Yep.
Can we expect an Andrew Romanoff endorsement of Bernie Sanders forthcoming?
So we haven't endorsed anybody in the race, in part because I'm in a primary of my own. I think if you look at my platform, you'll see that our plans for a Green New Deal and Medicare for All looks pretty similar to Senator Sanders. And I'm certainly committed to supporting.
I'd love to encourage you to endorse.
I appreciate that encouragement. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, thank you.